I woke up to the sound of diesel engines growling outside my window. At first, I thought it was a garbage truck making an early run. But when the vibrations started rattling the glass panes, I knew something was wrong. I stepped out onto my porch in a pair of worn boots and a t-shirt that still bore the faded insignia of the 82nd Airborne. That's when I saw them, three massive construction trucks, each with fresh paint, and the HOA's logo slapped across the sides like a brand. They rolled past the cul-de-sac, turned down my gravel path, and barreled straight onto my land. No warning, no phone call, no email, no posted notice on the community board. Just heavy wheels crushing the edge of my lawn, chewing through the border stones I'd hand-laid myself after retiring from the Army. I didn't live in one of the manicured homes on Camberley Lane, with matching shutters and pre-approved hedges. My place sat on the edge of the HOA's reach, a 2-acre patch my late wife and I bought before the subdivision sprawled this far out. I'd built the place myself, a small home, a greenhouse, and a tidy vegetable garden where I grew heirloom tomatoes, sweet corn, and lavender. The land meant something to me. It was the last thing that hadn't changed when everything else did. And now, strangers in orange vests were trampling it like it was nothing. I marched toward the trucks, waving my arms, heart pounding. A man with reflective glasses and a clipboard spotted me and gave a quick dismissive nod. "Whoa there, sir. Just clearing the path for the utility extension." "What utility extension?" I barked. "You're on my land." He barely looked up. "Check with your HOA. We've got approval." "Approval for what?" My fists clenched as I scanned the vehicles. They were offloading concrete cylinders, storm drains maybe, and rolls of black piping. Another truck arrived moments later, dragging a wide grater that left deep ruts in the soft ground. The grass, my sprinklers, the rose bushes lining the edge of the walkway, all torn up like it was worthless scrub. I stormed back inside, pulled out the HOA directory, and punched in the number for the board president. She answered on the second ring. "Karen McTavish speaking. It's Daniel Cole. Your trucks are on my land." A pause. I could almost hear her smile. "Actually, Mr. Cole, that strip bordering your west side is part of the community easement zone. It was added in last year's development expansion. You should have received the updated plot diagram. I never received anything. And this isn't an easement. It's part of my deeded acreage." She gave a light laugh, the kind that said she was used to getting her way. "Check your mailbox, Mr. Cole. All residents were notified." My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from rage. I had lived through the choking sands of Fallujah, had crawled through fire and steel, and I'd be damned if I was going to let a neighborhood tyrant like Karen McTavish steamroll my land without a fight. "They're ripping up my irrigation system. My garden's ruined." "Temporary inconvenience for long-term improvement," she said breezily. "The HOA voted to install a new drainage channel and pedestrian path. It'll improve property values across the board." "I didn't vote on that." "Well, you weren't at the meeting." Because the meeting notice had been posted behind the locked clubhouse doors, like always. I hung up without another word. My blood felt like it was boiling. I grabbed my deed, the original copy yellowed but legally binding, and stormed out to confront the workers again. By then, the grader had carved a 10-foot wide trench across the edge of my garden. My sweet corn was gone. The basil patch my daughter used to play near when she was little crushed under truck tires. I waved the paper in the air like a flag. "This land is mine," I shouted. "You're trespassing." The clipboard man glanced at me like I was a mosquito buzzing in his ear. "Sir, with respect, we're just following the work order. You can take it up with your board." The trucks kept moving. I stood there helpless as a backhoe started digging near the base of my greenhouse. That building had been my refuge, especially since Rachel passed. I watched the first glass panel crack and fall. Something inside me broke. Not in a way that made me cry or scream. No. This was different. Cold. Surgical. My years in the service came back to me in one rush. The briefings, the maps, the strategy sessions deep in bunkers while bombs fell outside. They wanted to fight fine, but they'd learn real quick. I never attacked first, but I always finished it. The next morning, I sat in my truck outside the county recorder's office with a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a copy of my land deed in the other. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, most of that, in a lawn chair under the busted frame of my greenhouse, listening to the creak of metal and the soft drip of broken irrigation hoses. I knew one thing: if I let this slide, it would only get worse. Karen McTavish wasn't just asserting authority. She was testing me. pushing the boundary, literally, to see if I would yield. The problem was, she had no idea who she was pushing. Inside the recorder's office, I laid out my original deed, the stamped plat map, and all the supporting documents I'd kept meticulously filed for over 15 years. The clerk, a soft-spoken woman named Beth, raised an eyebrow. HOA says this is community easement now, she asked. They can say the sky is green, I said. Doesn't make it true. She chuckled under her breath and pulled up the most recent GIS map overlay. We compared the documents. My property lot 47B had not been legally reclassified. There was no record of an easement filed against the land. No zoning update, nothing. This is still private property, Mr. Colbeth confirmed, turning the screen toward me. You own up to that split oak tree. Everything west of it is yours. I exhaled slow and heavy. It wasn't vindication yet, but it was the confirmation I needed to go on the offensive. Back home, the trucks were still there, fewer now, but enough to make their presence felt. They'd widened the trench-planted stakes with neon flags and rolled out tarps. I noticed something new, though, 2 HOA volunteers standing nearby with clipboards wearing smug little lanyards that made them feel official. I walked straight up to one of them, a man in his 60s with a receding hairline and sunglasses too big for his face. You're trespassing, I said flatly. He looked up. Sir, I assure you this development was approved by the board. Then show me the permit. He blinked, thrown off. It's handled through the city planner's office, the HOA coordinates. I cut him off. You're on private land, not HOA land. Mine. And there's no recorded easement. I just confirmed it with the county. He shifted his weight suddenly, not so confident. That's something you'll need to take up with Ms. McTavish, he said. I stepped closer. I did. Now I'm telling you. This is your one warning. Get your equipment off my property. He didn't move. But he wasn't the type to stand firm either, more like a middleman caught in a game above his pay grade. That afternoon, I drafted a certified cease and desist letter and delivered it straight to the HOA office. I knew they'd ignore it. That was the point. I needed them to cross one more line. On record. At 7:15 p.m., Karen McTavish called. I didn't let it go to voicemail. Mr. Cole, she began, her voice syrupy but cold underneath, we received your letter. But I'm afraid you're mistaken about the status of your property. Mistaken, I said, already recording the call. I just came from the county office. My land has not been reclassified. That depends on how you interpret the master plan, overlay, she replied smoothly. Per Article 4, Section 2 of the HOA Expansion Addendum, your western boundary falls within the designated community access corridor. That document was never approved by the city, and it wasn't voted on by all members. It was passed by quorum, she said, as if that ended the conversation. I paused. Karen McTavish, you do realize you can't override county property lines with an HOA meeting. Silence. This isn't just shady, I continued. It's illegal. I suggest you tread carefully, Mr. Cole. Filing false claims or interfering with construction could result in legal consequences. There it was, the threat. I know the law, I said, my voice even. And I know exactly what I'm allowed to build on my property. You've given me no choice. She hesitated. Build what? I didn't answer, just hung up. I stared out the window at my battered yard. The corn was gone. The basil, the roses, the little white fence, all shredded. But the dirt was still mine. I could feel it the way you know a scar on your body belongs to you, no matter how deep it runs. My fingers tapped against the desk. I opened the locked cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Inside was my old military drafting kit, a T-square, a compass, rolled blueprints from back when I used to design base layouts under mortar fire in Kandahar. If Karen McTavish wanted to play games with land boundaries, I'd remind her exactly who she was dealing with. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up sketching not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I knew my land better than anyone. I knew the load-bearing capacity of the soil, the water flow lines, the trench curves. I didn't need permits because I wasn't building a structure that required them. I was building a message. By midnight, I had my design, a memorial wall, styled like a forward operating base perimeter using recycled barriers and industrial fencing just within legal spec. No concrete foundation, no permanent anchors, just steel flags, motion lights, and a little surprise for anyone who dared to ignore boundary lines again. It would be up by dawn. And when they saw it, they wouldn't just stop, they'd freeze. By first light, the sound of grinding engines returned. I was already awake, hadn't slept more than 10 minutes, just enough to reset my focus. Outside, the HOA's trucks rolled in again, not a single one slower than the day before. The morning sun caught the edge of their chrome grills, making them gleam like war machines coming for conquest. Except this time I was ready. I stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed, watching as two dump trucks crept over the far corner of my land, like termites claiming rotten wood. One of them rolled directly over the last of my lavender beds, crushing the stalks into the muddy ground like they were weeds. Another veered off the trench and sank halfway into a patch of soft earth I'd watered the night before, a mistake they'd regret once the mud swallowed the axle. And just like that, the sound that had once made me sick, metal grinding on dirt wheels raking the earth, became something else, fuel. I walked the perimeter of my garden, or what was left of it. The irrigation lines were shredded. Hoses lay snapped, dangling like veins from the open gashes in the earth. A dozen sprinkler heads, all custom positioned, were scattered in the dirt like broken teeth. I bent down and picked up a piece of PVC snapped clean and smeared with oil from the truck treads. That pipe had taken me a week to dig and install back when my back could still handle long days in the sun. My wife had helped me bury it, her in gloves too big for her hands, smiling despite the sweat on her brow. Now it lay twisted and useless, a memory vandalized by HOA arrogance. I should have been numb. Instead, I felt laser-focused. At 7:42 a.m., I got a call from a woman on the HOA's legal committee. Her name was Cheryl. She sounded nervous. "Mr. Cole, I'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding. Karen McTavish may have been overzealous. We didn't anticipate how personal this land is for you." I didn't respond. "We believe a compromise is possible," she continued. "If you'd allow the project to continue, the HOA is willing to allocate a modest landscaping grant to restore your property afterward. A goodwill gesture. A bribe. No, just a restoration agreement. You destroy my property, and now you want to replace it with generic sod and a few discount shrubs." She sighed. "You're escalating this." "No," I said. "You escalated it the moment your trucks crossed onto my land. I'm just trying to avoid legal complications." "Oh, there will be complications," I said calmly, "but not for me." I hung up before she could respond. By late morning, the rest of the heavy equipment arrived. A bulldozer, another backhoe, even a concrete mixer. Apparently, they were preparing for a full-scale build-out, as if nothing I said or did mattered. That's when it happened. They hit the main irrigation line. I was at the side of the house, mounting the steel poles for my project, when I heard the hiss. Not a short burst, but a long, high-pressure scream of water escaping under tension. Then came the crash, a geyser shooting up into the air, followed by the backhoe lurching backward and nearly tipping as the ground beneath it gave way. The HOA workers shouted, scrambling to shut the valve that didn't exist because it had been buried years ago under 2 feet of stone and soil. Water poured out like blood from a severed artery, turning the trench into a swamp within minutes. One of the trucks tried to back out, but the saturated soil sucked its wheels down like quicksand. I couldn't help it. I laughed. By noon, my garden had become a construction graveyard. 3 vehicles stuck, a busted hydraulic arm, half a mile of ruined pipe. HOA Karen McTavish showed up personally, marching onto the scene in designer boots that weren't built for mud. She looked furious. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the twitch in her jaw. "Mr. Cole," she barked, stepping toward me. I didn't flinch, still trespassing. "This is obstruction, and you're tampering with active development. I'm protecting private property, my right, my land. This land was voted into the easement corridor." "No," you claimed. "It was. You never filed it. You never recorded it. And now you've caused over $10,000 in damages." She took off her sunglasses slowly, like that was supposed to intimidate me. "You think this little tantrum of yours will stop us?" she hissed. I tilted my head toward the pile of stuck machinery, the flooded trench, the workers now on their phones with tow services. "Does it look like you're making progress?" For a second, I saw something in her expression that wasn't just anger, it was fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize your control isn't as absolute as you thought. Then, like clockwork, she masked it. "You'll hear from our legal team," she said. "I look forward to it," I replied. "So will mine." She stormed off, heels slipping in the mud. That afternoon, I worked faster than I had in years. The steel framing of the wall came together in sections I'd prefabricated over the last 2 nights. I mounted motion-detecting lights, strung them along the upper edges, and bolted down the recycled steel panels that would form the face of the structure. But the best part, the flagpole, 10 feet high, and at the top, waving with a pride I hadn't felt in years, was the American flag, the same one I'd carried in a rucksack through 2 tours overseas. I'd kept it folded in my trunk, waiting for a moment that mattered. Now it flew not for war, but for peace. Not as a threat, but as a statement. This land is not yours to take. And by sunrise tomorrow, it would be impossible to ignore. The next morning, the emails started pouring in before sunrise. The first one was from the HOA legal liaison, an unremarkable woman named Darlene, who'd never so much as waved at me in the past decade. Her tone was frigid polite in a corporate way that barely concealed the threat underneath. Mr. Cole, this is a formal notice that your recent construction may be in violation of the Harmony Hills HOA development covenants. You are hereby requested to submit architectural review forms and cease further building until approval is granted. I didn't even blink. I replied with a single PDF, my property deed, the county map showing my boundaries, and an email thread from a city zoning officer named Mitch Taylor. Mitch Taylor and I had served together 20 years ago. He was now a mid-level zoning manager at City Hall, and when I'd reached out, he hadn't hesitated. Dan, you're in the clear. That parcel's privately held and not subject to HOA building restrictions under city code. As long as it's non-permanent and under 15 feet, they have no jurisdiction. I had legal clarity, I had structural legality, and best of all, I had a veteran friend with a city seal to back it up. But the HOA wasn't about to go down that easily. By 9 a.m., I'd received a second notice, this time a physical envelope taped to my front door like a scarlet letter. Notice of non-compliance. Violation, unauthorized structure, construction date, immediately. Penalty $500. Fine per day of non-compliance. Resolution required immediate dismantling of structure. They even included a photo of my wall printed and annotated with a red marker. The flag was circled. A note said, flagpole exceeds allowed visibility height. I laughed. Visibility height? That wasn't even a real term. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. HOA Karen McTavish wasn't afraid of the structure. She was afraid of the symbol it had become. The emails, the trucks, the walls, none of it mattered as much as the truth she couldn't erase. I had made a stand. Visibly, publicly. And the neighborhood was watching. Later that day, while I reinforced the base of the steel panels with ground stakes, I noticed 2 neighbors standing near the edge of their lawns, whispering to each other. Mrs. Patel, who hadn't spoken to me since her son's graduation 3 years ago, waved and walked over. I saw what they did to your garden, she said gently. It's wrong. I looked up, sweat dripping from my brow. They're pretending it's progress. She nodded. Karen McTavish bulldozed the park swing set 2 years ago to build that HOA shed. Never asked anyone. I remember. She hesitated. My husband's a paralegal. He could look over anything you plan to file. No charge. I blinked. Thank you. Then came the real shock. Mr. Hillman from across the cul-de-sac, retired insurance agent and lifelong rule follower, brought over a tray of lemonade and said, they've gone too far. Karen McTavish, meanwhile, doubled down. On day 2 of the wall's completion, I received a registered letter from a law firm in town. The envelope was thick, too thick. I took it inside and opened it at the kitchen table, knife in hand. Inside a cease and desist letter, 2 proposed fines, and a pre-litigation warning. They cited HOA bylaws articles I'd never signed, sections irrelevant to non-HOA parcels, and a fabricated clause about neighborhood harmony standards. It was laughable. They wanted to sue me, but the real kicker was this paragraph. Your structure constitutes an intentional obstruction of a pre-approved community improvement project. If not removed within 72 hours, the HOA reserves the right to remove the obstruction by contracted means and charge the cost to your account. They were threatening to tear it down. I paced the living room like I used to in field briefings, piecing together scenarios. I knew what this meant. Karen McTavish was planning to send a crew to destroy what I'd built, possibly with police backup, if she could convince someone at City Code enforcement that I was unstable or combative. I couldn't afford to wait. I pulled out my laptop and typed up my own letter, 3 pages long, filled with references to civil codes, county zoning exemptions, property, boundary laws, and a full description of the Veteran Memorial Clause that Mitch Taylor had reminded me of. But I didn't stop there. I attached photos of the destroyed garden timestamps from my security cameras, audio recordings of my call with Karen McTavish, and a scanned affidavit signed by Mitch Taylor confirming the land's status. Then I CC'd not just the HOA, but the city attorney, the local zoning board, the county supervisor, and for good measure, a reporter from the Tribune, who'd recently covered a story about HOA corruption just 2 towns over. By 3:00 p.m., the email was sent. Subject line, HOA overreach on private land. Evidence and witnesses attached. By 6:00 p.m., I got a response from the Tribune reporter, "Can we talk?" At 7:00 p.m., a city zoning inspector left me a voicemail. "Mr. Cole, we're opening an inquiry. Please don't dismantle anything." I stepped outside as the sun began to set. The wall stood firm now, complete with mounted floodlights, and a bronze plaque I'd installed at its base, in honor of those who stood their ground when silence was easier. That night I slept for the first time in days. I knew the real fight was coming. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The wall was only the beginning. By the time the city zoning inspector confirmed my land was exempt from HOA construction authority, I was already neck-deep in blueprints. Not because I needed to build more, but because I knew how this game would play out. Karen McTavish would escalate. She always did. And she wouldn't stop until I was either sued into submission or bulldozed into silence. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was what I used to do before I retired. I was a combat engineer in the U.S. Army. I built forward operating bases under fire. I stabilized hilltops with nothing but geotextile and stubbornness. I laid out temporary water systems in hostile territory with no margin for error. And now I had peace, time, and a mission. I pulled out the storage bin under my workbench, the one I hadn't opened in years, and unrolled my old engineering toolkit. The leather straps creaked like old bones. Inside was everything I needed: my compass set, metric rulers, high-grade pencils, and the same clipboard I'd carried through Iraq. I cleared my dining table and began sketching. At first it was instinctive muscle memory guiding my hand, but then it became personal. I wasn't just designing defenses. I was creating a message. A living, breathing statement to anyone who thought they could intimidate people into silence. The plan had 3 components. 1. The wall. Already built, reinforced now with steel mesh at the base, to prevent any attempt to accidentally collapse it during a cleanup. 2. The symbol. A raised platform on the center line of the property built of reclaimed wood and topped with a 5-foot bronze eagle I'd salvaged from an old veterans memorial auction. I planned to mount it so it faced the HOA clubhouse, eyes unblinking, wings outstretched, watching. 3. The message. 30 solar-powered uplights surrounding the platform in a perfect circle, each engraved with a word that mattered: integrity, freedom, boundaries, consent, justice, truth, service, home. It would look like a memorial to some. To others, it would be a fortress of defiance. I worked nonstop for 48 hours. The neighbors started noticing. Mr. Hillman brought over his old level and offered to help with alignment. A local high school kid asked if he could fly his drone to get overhead shots. I told him yes, and the photos he posted on Instagram were picked up by a local Facebook group within hours. By the 3rd day, people I didn't even know were dropping off supplies. "Keep going," they said. The HOA, of course, noticed. And Karen McTavish, she was losing her grip. That afternoon, 2 of her compliance officers, really just bored retirees in polos, with clipboards tried to enter my property to inspect for violations. I met them at the gate. "This is private land," I said. "You need a warrant." They backed off, but not before one of them snapped photos and muttered, "This isn't over." I welcomed the warning. By sunset, the eagle was in place. It took 6 of us to lift it, a rusted but majestic piece, with wings spread nearly 6 feet wide. I bolted it into the foundation, then stood back as the final light flickered on, catching the copper feathers in a halo of gold. And behind it, my flag still flew. That night, I hosted my first gathering in years. Not a party, nothing loud. Just folding chairs, coffee, and people who were tired of being afraid. We sat in a semicircle, watching the lights pulse softly in the dark. Some spoke, some didn't. But one thing was clear: Karen McTavish had miscalculated. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. I knew retaliation would come. The HOA wasn't used to being ignored, let alone defied. But I wasn't finished building. In fact, I was just getting started. I used the rest of the week to dig, literally. Using old Army trenching techniques, I rerouted my remaining irrigation lines to bypass the damaged sections. I set up cameras at all 4 corners of my land, linked to a secure off-site server. I even installed motion sensors at the base of the wall that sent real-time alerts to my phone. By day 6, the HOA had issued another violation, this one claiming I'd violated aesthetic uniformity principles of the neighborhood. I printed it out, laminated it, and mounted it on a stake next to the eagle. I added a plaque beneath it. This is what fear of freedom looks like. The next day, a Channel 6 news van parked across the street. The reporter, a young woman named Sophie Nguyen, asked if she could film the installation and interview me. I hesitated. I didn't want to make it about ego. But then I remembered something my old CO once told me. If the fight comes to your door, you don't get to stay quiet. You show up, you stand up, and you don't blink. So I said yes. That night, my story aired on the evening news. 5 minutes of footage, the torn garden, the wall, the flag, the eagle, and me standing with my arms folded in front of the memorial, explaining why land once taken means more than just square footage. The HOA's inbox must have exploded. Karen McTavish didn't show her face for 3 days. But when she did, I was ready. She brought papers, a summons, a threat of civil suit, and something deeper in her eyes, not just rage, but disbelief. How dare someone not back down? She handed me the envelope with a practiced smile. You think you've won, she said. I looked at the envelope. I haven't even started. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped back and looked at what I had built. It wasn't just a wall anymore. It wasn't just a tribute or a protest. It was a fortress. Not of concrete and bullets, but of intent. A place that said, this is the line, and you crossed it. Steel panels shimmered silver in the dawn light, bolted tight against the earth like a shield. The bronze eagle caught the first rays of morning, its wings aglow like it was ready to lift off and soar straight over the HOA clubhouse. The wall wrapped around the western boundary of my property in a perfect arc, a deliberate design choice meant to face them, not turn away. The flag still flew above it all, proud and unapologetic. On the ground beneath the eagle's perch, I'd planted 2 new rows of lavender, a tribute to what they destroyed, and a reminder that I could rebuild. And in the silence of that early morning, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just my fight anymore. By the time I'd brewed coffee and tightened the last bolt, cars had started to slow as they passed. Some stopped entirely. Neighbors got out with phones in their hands, recording videos, snapping photos. Someone posted a clip to Facebook with the caption, "Veteran builds fortress after HOA bulldozes garden." Within an hour, it had 40,000 views. At 9:13 a.m., a black Escalade pulled up. Karen McTavish stepped out in heels that weren't meant for gravel. Her nails were painted crimson. Her hair pulled tight in a bun that looked like it had never known wind. She was flanked by 2 men in tailored blazers, legal counsel, no doubt. They stood at the edge of my property, just far enough back not to trespass. I waited. She didn't wave. She just stared at the wall like it was a foreign object that didn't belong in her curated little world. Then she took a single step forward and said in a voice dripping with contempt, "This is a spectacle." I nodded. That's the point. You're making a mockery of the HOA's authority. No, I replied. You're doing that all on your own. Her lips pressed tight. One of the lawyers stepped forward, unfolding a document. Mr. Cole, pursuant to Harmony Hills, HOA Section 11B, we are serving you with formal notice that your construction violates the neighborhood covenant regarding unapproved structures and incompatible visual elements. You are hereby given 48 hours to dismantle the offending installation or face legal action. I took the document and read it slowly. Then I reached into the folder I'd brought with me. Here's my counter, I said, handing over my own paperwork signed letters from the City Zoning Board, a temporary designation of cultural significance under the Veterans Property Act, and the official boundary certification from the county clerk's office, all notarized. The lawyer took one glance and faltered. Karen McTavish snatched it from him, eyes scanning, lips moving. This isn't valid, she snapped. It's filed, I said, with the city, the county, and the Office of Veteran Affairs. You'd have to override all 3 to get it removed. Good luck with that. She didn't reply. Her eyes flicked toward the growing crowd of neighbors now watching from their lawns. Some were filming. Others were just smiling quietly, arms folded. A few had brought lawn chairs. Karen McTavish was losing the stage. Her attorney whispered something into her ear. She turned back to me, voice lower now. "You think this makes you a hero? You think anyone actually supports this circus?" Behind me, someone clapped, then another. A ripple of applause rose from across the street, not loud, but steady, insistent, like the start of something bigger. Karen McTavish flushed red. "I will not be made a villain," she hissed. I didn't flinch. "Then stop acting like one." She turned on her heel and left heels clicking furiously on pavement, the two lawyers trailing behind. The moment she was gone, a cheer broke out. I hadn't asked for it. I didn't need it. But I'll admit, it felt good. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone. That afternoon, a news drone buzzed overhead. The segment from Channel 6 had gone viral, picked up by national outlets. My phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, old army buddies I hadn't spoken to in years. They all said the same thing. "You're doing what we all wish we had the guts to do." But I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. I felt angry. I felt determined. Karen McTavish tried to strike back the next day by posting a public statement on the HOA website. It was full of legalese, vague accusations about community disruption and non-compliant landholders. She never mentioned me by name. She didn't need to. But the community didn't buy it. Instead, a group of neighbors started a petition. Protect Lot 47B. Stop HOA overreach. They gathered 300 signatures in 48 hours. Even the local VFW post commander showed up at my gate. With a handshake and an offer, "Let us know if you need help securing it. We got your 6." And yet I knew Karen McTavish wasn't done. She wasn't the type to surrender. She was waiting for a legal opening, one technicality, one oversight, one missed signature to take back control. But this time I was steps ahead. I wasn't just building a fortress of steel. I was building one of law, of visibility, of public support. One that no bulldozer could crush. I looked at the eagle again, perched high on the platform, and whispered under my breath, "Let her come." Because next time I wouldn't just defend, I would counterattack. It started with a single drone shot. The high school kid Jackson, I think his name was, had flown it up just after sunrise, circling my property from above. His footage captured everything. The sweeping curve of the steel wall, the bold flag snapping in the wind, the bronze eagle perched atop the platform like a sentry carved from defiance. The caption he posted read, "And this man built a fortress after the HOA destroyed his land. Respect." By noon, it had 100,000 views. By 3:00 p.m., I had 3 media vans parked on the curb across the street. And by 5:30, Karen McTavish's hands started to tremble. She tried to act like she wasn't watching, that this wasn't spiraling out of her control, but I saw her. She stood behind her blinds at the HOA clubhouse, peeking through slats like a general watching the siege of her own empire. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just kept sanding the last piece of the tribute bench I'd built beneath the eagle, a place for neighbors to sit, breathe, and remember that some things aren't meant to be governed by committee. A Channel 4 reporter, camera in hand, crossed the street toward me. "Mr. Cole," she said, "do you have a few minutes?" I nodded and wiped my hands on an old shop towel. I wasn't dressed for TV, just jeans and a faded Army engineer shirt, but that was the point. I hadn't built this to be seen. I built it because it was mine to build. Her cameraman filmed as she asked questions about the land, the HOA's destruction, the wall, the meaning behind the eagle. I answered carefully but truthfully, quoting the deed, the zoning codes, the county filings. I made sure every word was calm, controlled, unshakable. "This isn't about revenge," I told her. "It's about boundaries, literal and personal." They crossed mine. I drew them back. Her eyes lit up. "That's a powerful image." "Good," I said. "They need to see it." As she thanked me and turned away, I noticed Karen McTavish walking up from the clubhouse. Her steps were fast, sharp, like she was trying to catch up with a train already off the tracks. Her face was tight, her lipstick a little too perfect. She marched straight toward the camera crew, her heels crunching the gravel. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Karen McTavish, president of the Harmony Hills HOA. I'd like to issue a correction. This land is currently under review for easement status, and Mr. Cole's actions may be subject to legal consequences." The reporter blinked. "So the property is not HOA regulated." "It's complicated," Karen McTavish snapped. The board has been working on a long-term community improvement plan. But the county records say the land is private, correct? The reporter asked. Karen McTavish hesitated. The silence was deadly. The camera was still rolling. Well, we believe, but the records say it's not HOA jurisdiction. Karen McTavish's lips curled. We are investigating that. The cameraman panned over to me, then back to her. She noticed, of course. Everyone did. Karen McTavish turned red. This man is disrupting neighborhood unity, she said louder now. He's building militaristic structures. He's intimidating residents. That did it. Mr. Hillman from across the cul-de-sac stepped forward. No one here feels intimidated, he said clearly. Mrs. Patel nodded. He invited us all to visit. We feel safer now than we did before. Another voice from a younger mom, holding a toddler, Karen McTavish. You didn't even tell us about the trucks coming. He's just protecting what's his. Karen McTavish's jaw clenched. She looked at the camera, realized she was now the outsider in her own neighborhood, and tried to walk it back. I'm only doing what's best for the community. Then listen to the community, I said, my voice calm. She turned and stormed off the camera, following her retreat, like a defeated queen leaving a ruined court. That night, the segment aired during prime time. The headline on the screen, Veterans Stand, HOA Faces Backlash After Bulldozing Garden. It was only 5 minutes long, but it didn't need to be more. The images spoke louder than words, my scarred land, the fortress wall, the flag, the eagle. Karen McTavish flailing, the neighbors defending me. The next morning, the story made national rounds. I woke up to calls from Good Morning America, an email from a veterans' rights podcast, and even a request from a documentary filmmaker interested in HOA overreach across America. I turned most of them down. I didn't build the fortress to become famous. I built it to keep something sacred from being erased. But every time the story got reposted, shared, talked about, it chipped away at Karen McTavish's armor. And I knew she felt it. That afternoon, a moving truck parked outside one of the board members' homes. By sunset, another one resigned via an email blast riddled with phrases like unprecedented attention, stressful circumstances, and misrepresentation by leadership. Karen McTavish didn't show up to the monthly HOA meeting. Instead, she sent a proxy, a man in a suit, who tried to call the meeting to order. But half the chairs were empty. The other half were filled with residents, now holding copies of the bylaws. One of them held up my laminated violation letter and said, if this is what we're doing now, maybe it's time we vote to change the board. The room went quiet. The proxy stammered. That would require a special session. We'll schedule one, someone said, right after we visit Mr. Cole's memorial tomorrow. The meeting adjourned without further ceremony. Karen McTavish was losing her war, not because I had fought back, but because I had revealed what she was. Because the wall I'd built wasn't just a structure. It was a mirror, and she couldn't stand what it reflected. The letter Karen McTavish had been waiting for finally arrived. Except it didn't say what she hoped. A zoning inspector from the city, a man named Thomas Rayburn, came to my door with a clipboard and a smile. Mr. Cole, he said, adjusting his glasses. I just wanted to drop this off personally. Not because we had to, but because a lot of us downtown saw the news piece. He handed me an envelope with the city's seal. Inside was a formal statement from the Municipal Zoning Authority, affirming that my property lot 47B lay entirely outside the jurisdictional bounds of the Harmony Hills HOA. Not only that, but my structure, the wall, the platform, the eagle, even the lighting had been deemed compliant under the Veteran Recognition and Memorial Clause, a relatively obscure but enforceable provision under the city's Municipal Code Section 44.7. In short, I had every right to build what I built, and Karen McTavish had nothing. I scanned the document 3 times, savoring every word. I wasn't naive. Paper didn't always stop a determined tyrant, but this paper, this had the law behind it. I asked Thomas Rayburn if he could leave a second signed copy. Sure, he said. Want me to drop one at the HOA office too? I smiled. That would be perfect. Not 30 minutes later, HOA inboxes were hit with a mass forwarded version of the document CC'd to every resident, every city department involved, and just for good measure, the HOA's own legal team. Karen McTavish didn't reply. She couldn't reply. She had no counter permit, no zoning override, no easement filing. Her claims that my wall violated community harmony standards evaporated the moment someone asked, "Who's Harmony?" And still I wasn't done. I filed a formal liability claim against the HOA with the city's Public Nuisance Division citing property damage with photo and video documentation, emotional distress verified by my physician, and unauthorized use of private land, backed by GPS-tagged drone footage. I sent the claim via certified mail and CC'd it to the HOA's insurance provider. That's when things started to really shift. You want to watch an HOA panic threaten their premiums. Within 72 hours, a notice appeared on the HOA bulletin board. Emergency board session called, closed to public. Karen McTavish must have thought this was her moment to regroup, to spin, to pull the remaining board members into a defensive circle and blame media manipulation or miscommunication or some vague misunderstanding with the zoning office. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that alone anymore. A group of neighbors, including Mr. Hillman, Mrs. Patel, and even the teenage drone pilot's mother, had formed a volunteer HOA transparency committee. They'd filed a Freedom of Information Act request to get access to all internal HOA communications about my property. And what they found was damning. And emails between Karen McTavish and a private developer discussing an expansion project that would have needed access across my land. A conversation where Karen McTavish said, "He's a quiet guy. He won't fight this. Just act fast." And worst of all, a draft agreement promising financial kickbacks if the land was successfully converted into shared community access. They brought the evidence to me shaking. "You need to see this," Hillman said. I didn't say much. I just nodded. And then I made one more call, not to a lawyer, not to a news station, but to someone who'd only heard my voice once since all this began. Mitch Taylor, my old Army buddy turned city zoning manager. He picked up on the second ring. "I knew I'd hear from you again," he said with a chuckle. I told him everything: the emails, the FOIA docs, the damage, the manipulation, the attempted theft. He went quiet for a long moment. "Dan," he said finally, "you want this stopped? I want her accountable. Then it's time we go above city." 2 days later, the State Attorney General's office sent a letter to the HOA requesting all development records, board meeting transcripts, and voting protocols related to land reclassification. The dominoes were falling, fast. Karen McTavish tried to retaliate with one last Hail Mary, a lawsuit filed in small claims court citing defamation, obstruction, and community sabotage. I was served the paperwork by a process server who apologized as he handed it to me. Man, I've seen some wild ones, but this is personal. I brought the lawsuit to the same attorney who'd helped me file the liability claim. He read it once, looked up, and said, "She's bluffing. And this is about to backfire hard." Because what Karen McTavish didn't understand, or maybe refused to believe, was that I didn't build the wall out of spite. I built it because I had to. Because when someone bulldozes your peace and thinks they can scare you into silence, you don't just rebuild. You build something louder. That night, I received a voicemail from someone I didn't expect, a former HOA president who had served years before Karen McTavish took over. Her voice was slow and tired. "Mr. Cole, I just want you to know, we never wanted it to become this. We warned her about the power plays, about ignoring boundaries. You're doing what none of us could. Thank you." I saved the voicemail, and I sat there on the bench under the eagle looking out over the structure I'd poured my fury and discipline and loss into. And I thought of my wife. I imagined her walking the garden like she used to, pointing at the tomatoes and laughing at how I always planted too many. I thought of the rows she used to water, the way she'd kneel in the dirt unbothered by the mess. I couldn't bring that back, but I could protect what was left, and I could make damn sure no one had ever tried to take it again. It began quietly. No sirens, no fanfare. Just 2 unmarked cars parked outside the HOA clubhouse one Thursday morning. 2 men and a woman in dark slacks and windbreakers stepped out, clipped badges to their belts, and walked through the front doors like they owned the place. Within an hour, they walked out with boxes, laptops, flash drives, paper files. Karen McTavish wasn't even there to witness it, but I was. I stood behind my fence, sipping black coffee, watching from the shade of the eagle's wing. I didn't cheer. I didn't smirk. I just nodded, the kind of nod you give when justice finally starts lacing up its boots. The city had acted fast. Thanks to the FOIA documents, my neighbors uncovered the undeclared communications between Karen McTavish and a local developer. The unvoted resolutions, the backdoor negotiations, the city attorney's office had launched a full audit of the HOA board. They weren't just investigating misconduct, they were investigating fraud. 2 days later, subpoenas were issued. Karen McTavish tried to spin it. She posted a rambling presidential statement on the HOA's website blaming media sensationalism and malicious intent from fringe members of the neighborhood. But no one was buying it anymore. Not after the news report showing her signature on pre-development memos for a community logistics center, right where my garden used to be. She had planned to convert my land illegally into a paved road for HOA maintenance access. The project had already been priced out, permits drafted, developer lined up, all before a single notice was posted. And now it was all unraveling. The HOA office doors were locked by the end of the week. A notice from the city building inspector hung like a scarlet flag. Office closed pending investigation. Do not remove records. But the fallout was just beginning. 2 board members resigned within 48 hours, one citing ethical misgivings, the other admitting they had blindly followed leadership. A third vanished from public view, reportedly moved out of town. Karen McTavish, though, she refused to step down. She doubled down instead. She went door to door trying to spin her version of the truth, accusing me of inciting division, warning of anarchy in the community. But every door she knocked on seemed to swing shut just a little faster than the last. Some never opened at all. When she came to my gate, I was already outside wiping down the eagle's wings. She didn't speak at first, just stood there gripping a file folder like it was the last piece of power she had left. "You've poisoned this place," she finally said. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was tired. Not just physically. Her voice had lost its edge, her posture sagging beneath the weight of being seen for who she really was. "I didn't poison anything," I replied. "You just didn't expect anyone to fight back." She opened the folder and held it up like a final blow. "I'm filing a civil restraining order against you for harassment, public intimidation, and destruction of HOA property." I stared at her, slow and silent. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped a button. A small beep confirmed the recording. "Say that again," I asked. She froze. I wasn't bluffing. I had recordings, security camera footage, drone files, audio transcripts, a digital archive that could bury her deeper than any legal stunt she thought she had the stomach to try. Her mouth opened, then closed. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The next day, the neighborhood hosted a public special session. It wasn't sanctioned by the HOA. The office was still under audit, but that didn't stop the residents from gathering on the clubhouse lawn, holding signs and reading from printed bylaws. I stood off to the side, out of the spotlight, as Mr. Hillman took the mic. "We've tolerated abuse of power long enough," he said. "And thanks to one man's stand, we're finally seeing it for what it is." He pointed toward me. I raised a hand, reluctant. Mrs. Patel followed. "This is no longer about gardens or walls. It's about who speaks for us, who listens, and who serves." A resolution was proposed on the spot. Motion to recall Karen McTavish as HOA president. It passed by an overwhelming 7%. Karen McTavish didn't show her face again for days. But the real victory wasn't the recall. It wasn't even the investigation. It was the shift. The neighborhood changed. People who had never spoken to each other began chatting over hedges. Fences were painted together. Kids rode bikes across yards that had once been silent battlefields of lawn care competition. The tension that had ruled this place, the fear of HOA letters, the paranoia over mailbox paint, and garden gnomes began to fade. They built a bench in front of my wall, then added a community book box, then a second flagpole raised by a teenage boy whose father had served in Afghanistan. My land had become a place not of war, but of meaning. And I began to breathe again. The garden was gone, but new life had begun to take root. Neighbors offered to help rebuild. I told them I wanted to leave it as it was for a while, a living memorial. Not to what had been lost, but to what had been reclaimed. The soil still held the scars, but now they told a story. One that even Karen McTavish couldn't erase. The air was different now. It wasn't just that the HOA board had collapsed, or that Karen McTavish's name had been quietly removed from the official neighborhood directory. It wasn't the silence of the trucks that no longer rumbled across my property, or the way no one dared step past my boundary line anymore. It was something deeper. It was the sound of neighbors laughing again. The sight of children chalking pictures on sidewalks that once felt like surveillance zones. It was the feeling of belonging, not because it was granted by a committee, but because we'd reclaimed it. 3 months had passed since the investigation wrapped. The city closed the case with a formal censure against the HOA board for overreach and procedural misconduct. The liability claim I filed was settled quietly enough to cover the damage they'd done, and enough for me to install proper drainage and a modest irrigation system for the land they tore apart. Karen McTavish, she sold her house. The moving van came early on a Tuesday, just after dawn. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. The street watched her leave like a storm rolling out after a long, violent season, and no one waved. The wall still stood. I considered taking it down once or twice, but every time I walked past it, ran my fingers along the cool steel, or looked up at the eagle, I realized it wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had felt steamrolled. Ignored, pushed around, or silenced by someone who thought a title gave them dominion over decency. The bench beneath it had become a quiet gathering place. People came by with coffee in the mornings. Veterans sat there on Saturdays trading stories that made the rest of us listen a little harder and laugh a little louder. Even the HOA, restructured and humbled, began holding meetings in the open, no longer in the locked clubhouse, but in the park pavilion, where anyone could walk up and speak. One day, a kid maybe 9 or 10 walked up to me while I was planting new lavender on the edge of the wall. He looked at the eagle, then back at me. "Did you build that?" I nodded. "Yeah." He looked impressed. "It looks strong." "It is," I said. "Why'd you make it?" I smiled. "Because someone tried to take something that didn't belong to them, and I had to remind them it wasn't theirs to take." He thought about that, then nodded like it made perfect sense, and ran off to rejoin his friends. It was such a simple question, and yet it meant everything. That summer, the local VFW asked if they could hold a small memorial service on the property. Just 30 people, a flag raising, and a few words. I said yes without hesitation. The ceremony was quiet, powerful. A chaplain spoke. Names were read aloud. And when the last note of taps faded into the trees, a gust of wind lifted the flag like it knew it had something to say. Afterward, people walked up to me, some I barely knew, just to shake my hand. A woman from 2 streets over said, "I didn't even know your name until all this happened. Now I tell your story to my grandchildren." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and thanked her. Because in the end, it wasn't about the wall, or the garden, or even the lawsuit. It was about the moment when you stop being afraid. When you draw a line, not out of hatred, but out of love for your home, your peace, your memory, your right to exist without being dictated to by people who mistake power for purpose. That night, I sat out back watching the lights flicker on one by one around the platform. The lavender swayed in the breeze, new roots taking hold beneath the soil. And I thought of Rachel. She would have laughed at all this, I think. Shaken her head, teased me for being too stubborn, then helped me plant more basil because I always forgot to rotate the beds. She'd be proud. Not because I fought, but because I stood. For something, for someone, for myself. They tried to bulldoze me, to erase a piece of ground, because they thought no one would push back.